Hey everybody, today I'm taking a look at Mycelia. This is a 1 to 4 player abstract strategy board game that takes 40 to 60 minutes to play. The game is designed and illustrated by JJ Neville of Splitstone Games, and this game will be launched on Kickstarter in September 2023, and I've been kindly forwarded a copy of, or a prototype version of the game here to share my thoughts on. Now, before I get into my thoughts on Mycelia, I want to give a shout out to the show's sponsor, KIENDA.co.uk, who are my go-to online retailer, and if you use the link in my show notes or the QR code, then you can get 5% off your first order. Okay, so I've set up for a 2-player game of Mycelia here, and to start the game you'll build this modular kind of star-shaped symbol out of these triangle tiles, and you'll be placing your starting mother mushroom on one of these inner triangles. So you can see here I've got the white player and the blue player. Now sometimes if there is one of these tiles that have these bug symbols on, you'll also place one of these bug tokens, and we'll talk about what they do very shortly. Additional components consist of additional triangle tiles. You have a deck of these mushroom cards, and that's going to be the way you get points, which is by fruiting these mushroom cards by putting spores on these relevant colours on the main board and building networks, cashing them in, and basically fruiting these mushrooms. You have the additional bug tokens here. You have this die, which is going to show the direction in which the spores are kind of seeded onto the board, and again we'll touch on that shortly. And each player's personal setup will look like this, where at the start of the game you'll be given a hand of 3 mushroom cards to start with, just to give you something to aim towards. And you'll have these kind of 5 placeholder boards here, which will show what corresponds to what you've built. So say I ended up building this drumstick truffle club, I can put it on my 1 slot here. I'll put this little token on the board to show that represents my drumstick truffle club. You'll also have a bunch of these spore tokens which kind of show your influence on the board. So on each of your turns in this game you can take any combination of 2 different actions out of a possible 6. Now some of these actions are pretty simple, and we'll start with those ones, and some of them are a bit more complex and kind of the meat of the game, I suppose. So one action you can do is to simply draw a new mushroom card and add it to your hand. You can either take one of the face-up ones, or you can take a face-down card from the stack there. Another thing you can do is you can place one of these new tiles onto the board to expand the map accordingly. Another action you can do is to move your mother mushroom. Now when you do that you can move either 1 or 2 spaces, at least as a base rule, and you're going to do that by moving edge to edge or straight edge to straight edge like so. So if I was here I could say move to here like this. That is no issue. There are some rules though where you cannot ever pass through another player's mother mushroom, so you can actually end up blocking people if you get cornered. Now one of the main things you'll be doing is sporing your mushrooms, and to start with you're only going to be able to spore your mother mushrooms, but as you build more of these fruited mushrooms you can also spore these. So you can see here that each of these cards not only has the kind of influence you need on the board in order to build the card, it also has a number value here which shows how many spores that particular mushrooms spreads on the board. This symbol here is the victory points they're going to be worth at the end of the game, and there's also going to be a decay action at the bottom which we'll talk about very shortly. But let's talk about how the sporing action works. And we'll talk about sporing the mother mushroom. So the mother mushroom is the only one where you can spore kind of an infinite amount of times, and it always spores to a value of 2. So let's just say I wanted to spore my white mother mushroom here. I'm going to roll the die, which is going to show the direction the wind is blowing. So in this example, you can see that the die corresponds to going south here. And what you're going to do is you're going to start with putting a spore on the tile you're on, and then you're going to put the next spore on the adjacent tile to the direction the wind is blowing. Now, if the value was higher, so let's just say I did end up, let's just use the mother mushroom as an example. If I could spread 4, which I couldn't do, it would first spread like this, as I've already explained, and then it will start to kind of span out like this. So it would go here, then here, and so on. Now let's talk about how to fruit a mushroom. So you can see here that I've got some influence on these 3 tiles. That is the perfect requirement for this Liberty Cap, because I have 2 of these kind of yellow symbols and 1 of these kind of little spaceship symbols. And because that is a fulfilled contract now, and all of those spores are connected with each other in a network, now that is going to be eligible for me to score this card. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to remove those spores from those tiles, like so. And I'm going to build that Liberty Cap on one of my kind of card slots here. So let's start, keep it simple by putting it on the number 1, like so. And I'm going to put this little fruited mushroom on one of the 3 tiles that I've taken from. But let's just say I put it on here, like so. Now this is going to be a new place that I can spore from, and obviously it'll let me spread a lot more influence onto the board. And it's also going to secure me some victory points. Now, when fruiting a mushroom, there are some other things you need to consider in terms of networking. So a general rule is that the bigger or the more powerful the piece, it's going to trump the lower pieces in terms of connecting pieces or even taking other players' pieces. So basically, if I wanted to fruit a mushroom, I need to have all those spores connected with each other in a network, but your mother mushroom can actually act as a bridging piece between your different spores. So even though these spores aren't connected with each other, because my mother mushroom is in the center, that's actually going to make them eligible to be used in the same network. Also, if I have a bigger piece on my opponent's, or when my opponent has spores, I'm going to take those spores for myself. So you can see here that I have this fruited mushroom on a spot where the blue player has theirs. That spore actually now belongs to me because I have my fruited mushroom there. However, if my opponent decided to move his mother mushroom to that spot, he's going to trump my fruited mushroom, and therefore this is now going to become his, and they're going to end up chaining all these together. So it's quite a dynamic board state, and you need to consider quite a few things in order to make sure that your spores are all connected and are going to be eligible to be cashed in to create these fruited mushrooms. Now, each of these fruited mushrooms can only be spored twice, and once you've done that, you've got no choice really but to use the decay action. And when you use that decay action, you're going to take that exhausted mushroom, you're going to flip it the other way around, and you're going to tuck it under that relevant card slot like so, and then you're going to get either an instant ability or an ongoing ability for the rest of the game. So this one here, it says I can remove all spores from one tile, and you can see that could probably sabotage my opponent if used correctly. And there are a ton of different decay abilities in this game, which we'll talk on in a bit. And the endgame trigger is once a player has decayed a card in each of their 5 action slots. And the first player to decay a card in each of their action slots will receive this bonus token to get them 5 extra points. Now, I believe the only thing we haven't covered now are these insect tokens. Now, if you ever move your mother mushroom onto these insect tokens, you're going to collect them into your personal supply, and these can be used for 3 different reasons. The first of which is to spend a token to refresh the card row. The second of which is to cash in 2 of them in order to force your opponent to move their mother mushroom, or you can even move it for them. And the third one is that each pair of these at the end of the game is going to be worth an extra victory point. So let's take a quick look at some of these decay abilities just to give you an idea about what is possible. So you've got this instant ability here that lets you pick up 3 cards from the deck, and you can choose 2 of them. This one here gives you a permanent ability to make your mother mushroom spore 3 spores instead of the regular 2. You've got gain 2 spores and put them on multiple tiles, explore 2 additional tiles. You've got this ongoing ability where if you pick a card from the deck, you can pick 2 and discard 1. Randomly steal a card from your opponent. Place the wind die in the preferred direction. That's a very powerful ability, but when you see this mushroom kind of downward symbol, it means that only applies to that particular mushroom. Your mother mushroom now spores 3, which I think we already talked about that one. Move an opponent's mother mushroom up to 3 spaces. You can repeat the same action twice, which is one I particularly like. And my favorite out of all of them is that you can spore your mother mushroom and a fruited mushroom as one action. And as I said earlier, that 2 action system will continue in player order until somebody has decayed a mushroom on each of their 5 slots. The game will end immediately, and the player who triggered the end will get those 5 bonus points. You're going to calculate who's got the most victory points, and the player with the most points will be the winner. Okay, so let's share some thoughts on Mycelia. And let's start with that action turn system. Just having 2 actions on your turn out of a possible 6. It's nice and simple. And to be honest, 4 out of those 6 actions are so simple that you can get them done in a heartbeat. So it's not like there's a lot of rules overhead here, and you can pretty quickly internalize how the game operates and how it works. And I do like the fact that you cannot do duplicate actions unless you get that particular upgrade, because it means you cannot just spam the board with spores. I did really enjoy the importance of the mother mushroom, and it's probably my favourite part of the game, about how to perfectly position that at all times, because there are opportunities that kind of spring up where you can, move your mother mushroom onto a place that's highly populated, and you can trump your opponent's fruited mushrooms. You can steal all their spores on that particular spot. You can use it to chain networks together. And you can even prevent your opponent from sporing particular fruited mushrooms because you are on top of it, which can actually prevent them from ending the game, meaning that they might need to use things such as the bug tokens to move you out of the way. So it is a nice little tactical puzzle here. You can block people in, you can do lots of different things with that mother mushroom. And again, that's my favourite part of the game because it does have so much importance on how to position it. Another thing I enjoy about this game is the decay mechanism. That idea of tucking cards behind your board to get instant and ongoing benefits is a very nice touch. And it feels quite interesting in a game like this because you generally find that almost pure abstract games like this don't use mechanisms like card tucking or engine building, and I thought it was executed to a high standard. The actual abilities on the cards they range from pretty simple to very powerful. That just the ability of moving a mother mushroom an extra step can be a lifesaver. Being able to spore more efficiently and being able to, move the tiles around the board and steal spores. All these things can come in very handy if you trigger those abilities at the right time. Now, something that could be polarizing and frustrating at times in the game is the randomness of the die roll here, because of course you do not choose which way the spores spread, but you can take calculated risks here. And I do like the fact that the first spore actually starts on the tile that you spread from, so you are guaranteed yourself at least one particular symbol that you need. But again, if you are taking huge risks by spreading spores next to your opponent's fruited mushrooms or their mother mushrooms, you know that you are pretty much rewarding or just giving your spores to your opponents, which they're going to use against you essentially. Now, I personally don't mind it at all. I think it adds a bit of wildness into the game. It makes it a bit less predictable and a bit less kind of rigid. Just that little touch of wildness actually helps the game for me. But I can see if you are a big fan of pure abstract games and you want a more deterministic kind of experience, then that could leave you frustrated. The player interaction in the game is strong, as I mentioned, that kind of trumping mechanism of the mothers going over the fruited going over the normal spores, and that's always creating a back and forth of stealing spores off each other, trying to find little hotspots on the board, because I didn't mention that these kind of black tiles are wilds, which are of course extremely useful, but they are naturally going to gravitate all the players towards them. Meaning that you might want to put one of your fruited mushrooms on there, start sporing there to make sure you've got lots of spores on those spots. But of course, somebody's going to sneak in there. They're going to put their mother mushroom there and claim them all for themselves. You might want to force them out of the way. So yeah, there's always this back and forth and little opportunities kind of arising on the board that you might want to capitalize on. Do you want to get into that back and forth? Do you want to find yourself a little corner of the board that's untouched and focus on your own thing that way? And there is that pressure of trying to keep up with your opponents, because it does have a somewhat sudden death feel to the game, because that idea of as soon as the 5 slots are completed, then the game is going to immediately end. So you need to be kind of looking over your shoulder, making sure that the game isn't going to end abruptly at a time where you're not prepared. Now, this game does accommodate 1 to 4 players, and I have not tried the solo mode, so I cannot comment on that. But my favourite player count for this game by far is 2 players, because I think it moves at a much brisker pace. I do like how dynamic the board state becomes at higher player counts, because there's a lot more kind of breaking chains and positioning those mother mushrooms to sabotage other players. But I do think it has the tendency to drag on a bit too long when you're getting to that 3 or 4 player count. And to my knowledge, there's nothing in the rulebook that compensates for scaling. So I think it would be nice if you are, say, playing with 3 or 4 players, maybe remove one of these player slots so that it's the first player to do, 4 card tucks rather than the 5, just to prevent it from outstaying its welcome. Okay, so let's talk about the production for the game here. And I need to be fair here because this is a prototype copy and there will be some changes with the final version. And I believe there is going to be 2 versions of the game you can buy, one of which is going to have laser cut wood pieces, and the other one is going to be, your traditional cardboard. Now, I am a colourblind person. It is quite difficult for me to differentiate the different tile types here. Now, they have gone to efforts to try and put some symbology on these tiles so that somebody who's colourblind can differentiate them. Like, for example, you can see the little symbols. For me, these are far too small, and it was a bit of work to almost, cross-reference the board state to the cards themselves, because not only are the symbols small on the cards, they are also small on the board. Now, I have spoken to the designer about this, and they are going to be enlarged for the final version to make it a lot more playable, which for me would be a big lifesaver, just for the ease of play for this game. But on top of that, I do think the board state becomes quite busy. I'm not quite sure if this kind of like Celtic pattern in the background helps with the visual ease of looking at the game. So it is a little bit congested there, and it's a bit of an eyesore, I think. But that instead, in complete contrast to that, the card artwork is absolutely stellar. And this is the artist of this game is the designer of the game. So this is clearly a very talented guy. The artwork here is just absolutely sublime, and I cannot praise this enough. I think it looks wonderful on these white backgrounds. It really does pop, and just these wonderful scientific mushroom pictures look amazing. So full props for that. Okay, so let's share some final thoughts on Mycelia. And there are a lot of things I like about this game, and particularly when it comes to the board positioning and the idea of chaining your spores together, cutting people's networks off, blocking them in, claiming people's spores for yourself. A good back and forth there, and quite a fierce competition on the board. I also do like that card tucking. I think that's an extra touch that really does help the game and adds a little bit more interest into just giving you little boons as you go. Negative-wise, I've already mentioned the production issues, which should be an easy fix. And again, that player scaling, I think, could have been worked on a little bit, but that's an easy house rule to overcome in terms of just making it move at a more of a brisk pace by maybe getting rid of one of these spore spots. Now, the other criticisms I have are probably more personal preferences. In terms of the endgame trigger, I tend to usually find that these kind of sudden death endgame triggers, as soon as something happens, it will end. For me, that almost always encourages the rush strategy, and I'm not quite sure because I'm not terribly experienced with this game. I've only played it a few times, but each time I have played it, that rush strategy seems to be hugely beneficial. And it's always determined the winner, so whoever finishes first is going to win. But I'm not sure if that's going to be accurate in terms of consistent plays. I'm not sure, but it's just, again, a personal preference. It's not my favourite way to end a game. And also, I kind of find myself always leaning towards just spamming the board every single time. I think you'd be a bit of a fool if you're not at least sporing every single turn. And what I don't normally find is, rather than me building towards a certain card, a lot of the time I'll just spam the board, and then hopefully that would correspond to the cards that I have, rather than the other way around. The more I played this one, the less that's been an issue, because I found myself being more and more efficient with it. But it's just something that, I don't know, it's just something I notice in these kind of resource games where you're collecting different types and you do have a ton of resources on the board. I normally find that I just flood the board as much as I can and hope I have what I need, rather than, again, building towards something, which is a bit more satisfying. But again, I'm probably wrong on that in terms of repeated plays and if you want to play completely efficiently. But overall, it's a very interesting design. I like the way the board game changes. I like the way it develops and opens up. Again, the artwork is absolutely sublime. And, for me, as not a huge fan of abstract strategy games, this one does have a lot I like about it, and I'd certainly play it some more. I even like that random touch of where the spores blow, because I think it adds a bit more excitement into the game and can create some quite funny moments when you end up blowing all your spores into your opponent's hands, and they're going to end up building one of their mushrooms to use against you. So that's Mycelia. Certainly an interesting design. Best of luck for the Kickstarter launch. And again, if you like pure abstract strategy games with a touch of wildness, then I'm pretty sure you'll like this game. So that is Mycelia.